I do want to talk more about the protests overall, so let's bring in Congressman Rudy Yakym, a Republican representing Indiana in the House, joining us now live to discuss. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
You bet. It's great to be here today.
All right, so first off, I do want to ask kind of your thoughts overall, because we've seen so many different videos that have been floating around from places like Columbia University, UCLA, this morning over at UPenn. Tell me what goes through your mind as you're looking at some of those videos and seeing what is happening on the college campuses.
Well, what goes through my mind is that we haven't seen this type of anti-Semitism at this level. I mean, hatred against Jews, calls for the destruction of Israel, calls for the wipeout of the Jewish nation. We haven't seen that since a pre-World War II Germany. And it's very scary to see. And when I talk to friends in Israel, when I talk to the Israeli leadership, one of their top concerns, I mean, their top concern about the United States is the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses. When you allow that to go unchecked, you create the environment that you created back in that pre-World War II Germany, which is what allowed 6 million Jews to be slaughtered at the hands of the Nazis. We've had a Holocaust before, and we can never allow anything like that to happen again in our world.
And I do know that you did meet with some Jewish students last week. Tell me exactly what you are hearing from them as all of this is happening.
Well, I was honored to meet with a number of students from Northwestern University who came to my office in Washington to share their very specific issues that they have with anti-Semitism that they have personally experienced on their campus. They shared horrifying stories of them walking across campus, and because they had a Star of David around their neck or some sign that they were Jewish, they were called out. They've been harassed. They've been threatened and intimidated while on campus. All the while, the leadership there has been negotiating and entertaining these negotiations with the pro-Hamas protesters who are on their campus. And so I heard very directly from them the instances of anti-Semitism that they've experienced on their campus. And I've heard from a number of Jewish students across this country over the course of the last 6 to 8 months of the specific cases of anti-Semitism that they've experienced on their campuses. This is why I have a bill that I've introduced in the House. It's called the Protect Jewish Students and Faculty Act, HR 7478. And what that bill does is it goes after colleges and universities receiving Title IV federal funding, requiring that they have the working definition of anti-Semitism on their books as a policy for both students and faculty that they have to enforce on campus as a condition of receiving Title IV federal funding. Colleges and universities should be fighting anti-Semitism, not fueling anti-Semitism. And what I want to do is make sure that we no longer send taxpayer dollars to colleges and universities who fuel as opposed to fight anti-Semitism.
And what you're looking at right there on the left side of your screen is just some of the video that we saw at those protests. This was last weekend, and it was over at Portland State University. You can see these kind of clashes that are taking place between the protesters and law enforcement. As I mentioned, more than 2,800 arrests at last check, that number continuing to rise. Now, some lawmakers have called for the resignation of some of the leaders, the presidents of these universities. I want to get your take on that.
Well, look, you've got these cases here where inmates are literally running the asylum. You have people conducting illegal activities on campus. This has gone way beyond a peaceful protest. You have these protesters who are not only supporting the terrorist organization Hamas, but they've also broken into a number of administration buildings. They've taken over the campus and completely overrun it in an illegal manner. And so there are a very few university campuses who are handling this well. But by and large, a lot of these administrators, a lot of these presidents of universities have made attempts at appeasement. And what we've seen is the more they attempt to appease, the more they attempt to negotiate with these protesters, these illegal encampments in some ways, the worse it gets and the more out of hand it gets. And so we cannot, again, allow anti-Semitism to take root on our college campuses.
Do you think these protests are going to calm down at some point in the near future, or are we going to see them get even more intense?
Well, it depends on how the university presidents handle this. I mean, we had, for example, on Wednesday, the D.C. mayor Bowser was supposed to appear before a House Oversight Committee for a hearing. But because Mayor Bowser called the D.C. police in to clear out the disgusting, dirty, and unlawful encampment, that hearing was canceled. And what we have seen is when university presidents lean into this, not allow illegal activity to take place on their campus, not allow anti-Semitism to take place on their campuses, not allow these protesters to call for the destruction and the annihilation of the Jewish state, things seem to go better. But as long as they allow this to happen and they allow it to be appeased in some way, they try to negotiate with the people who are on these campuses holding these encampments, it always gets worse. But they've got to drive a hard message that illegal activity and anti-Semitism will not be tolerated on college campuses.
If you could speak directly to some of these Gaza war protesters that are there on college campuses, whether they're students or other people that have shown up to protest, what message would you have for them? What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, Israel has a right to exist, period, end of story. It is the Jewish state in the Middle East. It's the only democracy in the Middle East, and they have a right to exist. Number two, we cannot forget, a lot of these folks are calling for a ceasefire. There was a ceasefire in place on October 6th. And Hamas chose to break it when they illegally crossed the border and killed the largest number of Jews since the Holocaust in a single day. So we cannot forget it's Hamas that broke that ceasefire. When a ceasefire was negotiated in November or late October, early November of last year, it was Hamas who broke that ceasefire. So the quickest way for this conflict to end is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages, including the American hostages who are still being held in Gaza.
My last question here before I let you go, I do want to get your take on the comments that were made this week by President Biden as he now says that the U.S. will not be supplying weapons to Israel if they do go into Rafah and perform that operation, which it does appear is going to happen really any day now. What are your thoughts overall on the comments from the president?
Well, this is yet another betrayal of our close ally and friend, Israel. This is a cowardly attempt to appease the president's radical left-wing base. And the time for choosing is right now. And President Biden has unfortunately decided to choose Hamas and the terrorist proxy of Iran. And let's not forget, Iran and Hamas are very happy what's going on on our college campuses as it relates to anti-Semitism. They're also very happy with President Biden's decision to withhold aid from Israel. President Biden said as a candidate in 2019, he said, quote, "The idea that I would withhold military aid, as others have suggested, from Israel is bizarre. I would not do that," end quote. That is exactly what he's doing right now. So either he has changed his mind or he has forgotten his words from the 2019 campaign. We in the United States House, we have done our job. We passed the aid for Israel. The president said that he wanted that aid, but now he is using that aid as a negotiating chip in order to induce a foreign military and a foreign government to do what he wants them to do. That is not the intent of that legislation, and it certainly is not in the best interest of the United States of America or our number one ally in the Middle East, Israel.
Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. Is there anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
I would just close out by saying these anti-Semitic protests are wrong, and we absolutely have to call it out. Israel is the only democracy, only true democracy in the Middle East, and we've got to stand with them. They were the ones who were attacked on October 7th, and if Israel puts their guns down, they are the ones who are wiped out. If Hamas puts their guns down, that is what ultimately leads to a level of peace in the Middle East. But as long as there is a terrorist organization who is running Gaza, you will never have peace over there.
All right. Thank you again for taking the time to be here with us today. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.